Well, the old piece has finally arrived, and with it we got a rework to our operators and drifters. This is now unofficially Focus 3.0, and we got a ton of new tools added to our arsenal to make our builds shine like never before, ranging from a staff that nukes entire rooms to a humongous blade that slices through all enemies standing in your way. This video will provide you with my opinion on each of the new Tektolyst weapons, as well as their Tauron Strikes, going fully in depth on how they work, and finally putting them into a tier list. Let's get into it. To get these new focus upgrades, you will want to play the new Perita Rebellion missions from the Dark Refractory. You can unlock this after completing the Old Piece quest, and you can access it from your navigation menu by hitting this new interact key for it, or by going to your main menu and clicking on the Dark Refractory. When you then select the Perita Rebellion, you can select 3 different missions. Each mission will give a special type of resource upon completion, and on Steel Path, these materials can be randomly dropped from the prime warframes that spawn during these missions. The Hunhullus mission will reward you with Lyroic Bridges, the Tektolyst with Ren Hypercores, and the Vanguard mission with Ascaris Prime. Once you have 150 of each material, you can trade them in for a Tektolyst weapon. These are obtained from Marie at the cathedral that you can find in the Sanctum Anatomica. Unlocking a weapon for a specific focus school will give you a neat little cutscene with Leon, our proto-frame for Harrow, and will unlock modding on this weapon for the focus school corresponding with the weapon that you've just purchased. In this mod menu, you can equip new arcanes, which you can also get from the Rebellion missions, and you can equip new mods that either buff your operator, your amp, or interact with your new operator ability called the Tauron Strike. Speaking about the Tauron Strike, let me explain what it is and how it exactly works. Once you unlock one of the Tektolyst weapons, you will unlock the Tauron Strike ability for your operator or drifter. This is the new 3rd ability, and some of the UI is shifted around to make this work. What used to be your operator energy is now the Tauron Strike charge meter. What used to be your amp ammo is now your operator energy, which you can use to cast things like Void Slings. And the amp ammo is now displayed in the same way as for all other weapons in the game. Once the Tauron Strike meter is full, you can activate it. Each of the Tektolyst weapons will have their own Tauron Strike accompanied by a flashy animation and also new mechanics. During the casting of Tauron Strike, you will also be completely unkillable. According to the developers themselves, they are also extra effective against boss-type enemies that have a dedicated health bar in the UI, which you usually see on the top of your screen. However, how they are exactly more effective is unknown as of making this video, and my best bet would be that they either fully or partially bypass the damage attenuation mechanic that is still present on these enemy types. Now let's get to how we actually charge this Tauron Strike meter so we can use these new overpowered abilities. To charge the meter, you need to get enemy kills. Each kill will charge the meter by a flat amount, and charge is gained by both your own and allied kills. I've seen numbers floating around stating that this could take up to 4,000 kills for one charge if you don't have any of the modifiers affecting your charge rate. But luckily I did find some tactics to greatly increase the amount of Tauron Strikes that you can get. First, let's talk about some resources that we can use to increase the Tauron Strike charge rate. We have one of the new arcanes that can provide it passively, called Zid-an Sek-Eel. This will increase the charge rate by 9%, which is something, I guess. However, alternatively, there's also one mod and an arcane that you can use to gain initial charge, which can get your meter filled up to 30% right away. Luckily, besides the Zid-an Sek-Eel arcane, we have some more ways to increase our Tauron Strike charge rate, namely focus lenses. Each focus lens equipped will increase charge rate by 10% irrespective of the lens's quality. This means that a Lua lens will give you just as much charge rate as a basic focus lens. Furthermore, you do not have to equip the right focus lens per focus school. For instance, if you use the Vazarin Tauron Strike and have a Madurai focus lens, you will still get the 10% bonus charge rate. In total, we can equip 7 lenses onto a build. 1 on your Warframe, 1 on each of your weapons, 1 on your arc gun, 1 on your K-drive, and a final one on your amp. Using all sources will end up giving a 46% increase to the charge rate across the board, which you will definitely notice. This also may mean that the market for Lua lenses is about to erupt, as people will need more lenses and focus than ever before, especially since there's now a reason to unlock every focus school to gain access to the new modding system. Then I also want to talk about the convergence orbs that you can find when you have at least one focus lens equipped on your build. These orbs give a bonus to your focus gain, but also your Tauron Strike charge. These orbs can be encountered as either yellow or blue orbs. Yellow ones spawn as long as you are not exceeding your daily focus cap, and blue ones will start to spawn when you are exceeding this value. The yellow orbs give a bonus to focus gain, fill your meter for the Tauron Strike by 20%, and will give an overall 5 times multiplier to your charge rate. The blue ones will function exactly the same, just not give you the increase to your focus. Both of these orbs share the same cooldown timer, which is around 60 to 90 seconds. Okay, so now that you know how to charge up your Tauron Strike in the most efficient way possible, let's talk about what each one of them does and which new perks they are accompanied by. The damage for some Tektolyst weapons will be spread across 2 different types. Either what I like to call Tektolyst damage, or a variant of ability damage that is increased by sources like Nourish, Roar and Plunder, but not by ability damage shards. Tektolyst damage, on the other hand, cannot be increased by these sources, but will be able to bypass damage attenuation on boss-type enemies, and it can kill the ghost form of Thrax units, which can be quite useful. So if you want to make the most out of the Tauron Strikes that deal ability damage, make sure you have one of the sources for the additional multiplication. Besides this, both Tektolyst and the ability damage can increase their damage output based on damage vulnerabilities that are put on enemies. This includes Warframe abilities like Sentient Wrath from Caliban, but also the viral status effect. With all of that being said though, let's get into our first Tektolyst weapon, which is for the Madurai focus school and is called Thara. Thara is a void-imbued bow that will rain down Tektolyst damage upon enemies in a large radius. This arrow barrage is able to pass through ceilings, so if you're in a tile set with low roofs, don't worry, the damage will still work. To unlock the Tauron Strike ability and the corresponding perks, you will first need to purchase the Tektolyst weapon, and then you will find a new branch added onto your existing focus skill tree. Unlocking and upgrading the Tauron Strike ability and its perks will require both focus points of the respective focus school, as well as the same resources that you use to acquire the Tektolyst weapons. Thara's Tauron Strike can be increased to last a total of 7 seconds. Unlocking and upgrading the perk Overwhelming Power will grant 5% ability strength for each enemy hit by the initial barrage, up to 50%, lasting for 30 seconds. Unlocking and upgrading Rain of Arrows will cause additional arrows to be fired as long as damage is being dealt, with as low as a 0.35 second cooldown. The Downpour perk will cause Rain of Arrows to hit an additional 4 enemies within 10 meters. And finally, Surging Storm will increase the Rain of Arrows radius to 5 meters in total. Rain of Arrows can, funnily enough, be triggered by pretty much any damage as of making this video, which seems like intended behavior, but could get nerfed in the future. The only damage that doesn't trigger Rain of Arrows is companion damage and, for instance, mind-controlled enemies that deal damage to others. The damage done by the Rain of Arrows perk is the earlier mentioned ability damage, meaning it can't kill Thrax in their ghost form, and will benefit from ability damage multipliers like Nourish. This effect will also last for about 30 seconds after casting your initial Tauron Strike, even though it's not stated in the description of the perk. It does, however, show as a tooltip in the mission itself. Besides this, it also has infinite range, so if you have an ability that's able to skip line of sight, like Saryn's Spores, you can continuously nuke the map if you keep up your Tauron Strike by picking up convergence orbs. I have a build for this exact technique out on my YouTube already, which you can check out. The Thara Tauron Strike is part of what's arguably the most powerful focus school for amp damage, and the newly added 50% power strength buff can be great for Warframe abilities that can snapshot them, like Chroma's Vex Armor and Titania's Razor Wing with the Razor Wing Blitz augment. In the end, Madurai properly holds itself in place as being one of the top tier choices for focus schools due to the versatility that it provides in all scenarios, as well as the insane damage output that it can give to operators and amps. And as a cherry on top, for me this new Tauron Strike is easily an S tier. Next up is the Tektolyst weapon for Unairu, which is called the Cogron and is a hefty void-imbued hammer. Upon using the Cogron, you will slam the ground, causing up to 4 shockwaves, 1 that spawns on the first slam of the initial cast, and 3 that trigger in intervals afterwards. Each of the shockwaves will deal Tektolyst damage that I've discussed before. The range of these waves can go up to a ridiculous 40 meters when using the Great Quake perk, which adds an additional 40% radius. The Sundered Bounty perk will cause each shockwave to generate 5 pickups, which can be universal orbs or ammo pickups. Tempered Benison will create armor modes that have an orange color and will be spread around on the floor. Picking them up can give up to 450 armor per mode, and you can get up to 5, meaning that you can get a total 2250 additional armor, which is pretty nuts and is actually able to synergize with a couple of newly added arcanes from this update. These modes work exactly the same as the health conversion mod, and it looks like it's probably copy and pasted code knowing DE, and I can't really blame them for it, to be honest. Anyway, as it shares the same code, this means that modes will only be consumed upon health damage and will take 3 seconds to disappear after you've done so. Then for the final perk we have Seismic Impact, which will cause the next 4 slam attacks to spawn the initial same shockwaves that you got from using the Cogron hammer. These shockwaves that you spawn via your slams will have the exact same effects and even count as Tauron Strike hits for things like arcanes. All things considered, Unairu is now a very well-rounded focus school, as it also gives some much needed sustain options to draw it in closer for beginners to focus schools like Zenurik. However, from all of the new Tektolyst weapons, I find this one to be kind of underwhelming, and it's also not really the one I would recommend picking up first. So all in all, I would place the Cogron Tektolyst weapon in the B tier. Then we have Zenurik, which is one of the most used focus schools for new players in Warframe, and while this used to be undoubtedly the best choice back in the day, I would personally not really recommend it to players before the old piece. Mainly because I like recommending Unairu, as it provides a lot more utility for new players, and the energy problem that we used to have in Warframe a long time ago is basically fixed with just 2 mods and a Helminth nowadays. Those being Synth Deconstruct, Equilibrium, and Nourish. But let's look at the Tektolyst weapon that Zenurik got this update. It is called the Lorak, and it is a powerful void-imbued grimoire. Activating it will spawn a destructive void beam that deals heat damage, and enemies hit will be primed with a special effect, causing them to drop energy orbs with a 100% drop chance if killed within the following 10 seconds. The Prismatic Beam perk will cause the void beam to split off into smaller beams connecting with enemies within a 20-meter range. Then we have the Spectral Pages perk, which will spawn 4 spectral pages that will give an additional 100 energy and can provide up to a 50% buff to cast speed, ability strength, and ability duration if combined with the perk Boundless Energy. The 100% bonus energy will be consumed upon casting abilities and will use the energy cost of said ability. This means if you proc Arcane Steadfast, which makes your abilities free, you will not consume the additional energy at all, keeping your 50% buff for longer. This also means, however, that builds with low energy efficiency will burn through this buff quite rapidly. So maybe reconsider if you want to use Blind Rage or not. The final perk for Zenurik grants the pages the ability to fire energy beams that stun enemies and deal damage to them within 60 meters. The more pages you have, the more passive crowd control and damage you will deal. All of the damage dealt by the Lorak, which means both the initial beam as well as the energy beams that you can get from the spectral pages, are counted as Tektolyst damage, which you can use to take down ghost forms of Thrax units or deal some decent damage to boss type enemies, like for instance Acolytes. All in all, the Lorak is a decent weapon to use, but personally I think it could be better. Building around the pages that the book gives you is a possibility, but it is rather annoying to do, and it will likely only work well in a handful of scenarios. Nonetheless, the increased energy pool that it provides for a short duration, as well as the 50% buff to cast speed, strength, and duration are very nice to have. Taking all of this together, for me, I would put the Lorak in A tier. Next up is Naramon, where we have the Void Blade Vexoric. Vexoric is just a humongous blade that slices enemies through walls, dealing Tektolyst slash damage in what I've seen go up to a crazy 80 meter range. The initial strike by the Vexoric procs a guaranteed slash status effect, which can also deal millions of damage. Then, using the perk Astral Cut, you can also increase the radius in which the enemies are hit by another 80%. When the Vexoric Tauron Strike is activated, the perk Spectral Blade will summon copies of your equipped melee weapon for all allies within affinity range. When dealing melee damage, these Spectral Blades will deal damage to enemies within a 10 meter radius. Hits made by these Spectral Blades will count towards your combo multiplier and will grant extra Tauron Strike charge. The blades will scale with mods that you equip on your melee weapon, but only the melee damage, elemental, and status chance mods. The damage these blades do also count as the ability damage I've highlighted before, meaning that they can get buff damage from things like Nourish, Roar, and Plunder. The Spectral Blades perk makes the Naramon Tauron Strike one of the fastest to recharge, which can be handy if you rely on it to trigger certain arcanes, which I will discuss in a bit. With the perk Flowing Strikes, the 10 meter range of Spectral Blades can be increased to 26 meters, and with Hungering Blades you will get an additional attack for each Spectral Blade, helping even more with your Tauron Strike charging and building melee combo. In conclusion, Naramon is still a very powerful option and is a good choice for melee-focused warframes like Excalibur and Valkyr. However, for these types of melee builds, I also enjoyed using the Cogron from Unairu, so use whatever you think feels best or looks the coolest. All in all, in my opinion, the Naramon Tauron Strike feels quite lackluster in terms of damage output, besides the initial damage and the slash status effect that you can get. Besides this, the focus school as a whole is just not as good as the other ones. And you can hate me for it, but in my opinion, out of all of these new Tauron Strikes, the Vexoric for me is a C tier. Finally, let's talk about what I think is one of the best Tektolyst weapons in the game right now, and that is Nidri, the void-imbued staff that pairs with the Vazarin focus school. The sheer amount of stuff that this staff is able to do is absolutely insane, and it's incredibly powerful across the entirety of the game in all scenarios. Vazarin is already an incredibly powerful focus school in endgame content due to the Protective Sling passive, which gives any build full invulnerability for 4 seconds when performing a Void Sling into your Warframe. This is most effectively used in endgame boss fights that disable abilities, as they will not disable the invulnerability that Protective Sling is able to provide. And now on top of this we even have Nidri. When you cast the Nidri Tauron Strike, it will be planted into the ground with a cool animation, and it will spawn a vortex of water and void energy that ragdolls enemies that it initially hits. It will also apply a collective curse-like effect from Kalervo, where enemies within the vortex share the damage dealt to any of them as true damage. This means that you can easily nuke an entire group of enemies when planting the staff, but also any enemies that enter during the vortex afterwards. The initial vortex will deal Tektolyst damage and send enemies into a ragdoll state, similar to Vazarin's Void Snare and Zephyr's Tornado. Then the perk Rift Waters will strip maximum enemy overguard by 25% per second, causing them to lose all of their overguard in only 4 seconds. The perk Eroding Rapids will apply a 100% status vulnerability to enemies damaged by the vortex. This is an insanely powerful effect and is actually only the 3rd source of status vulnerability in the entire game, next to Dante's Page Flight and the Burning Hate augment. Then we have the Deathless Currents perk, which causes the vortex to heal allies for 250 health per second while they are inside. And if this wasn't enough, it also instantly revives any downed allies within its radius, and as the cherry on top, it even revives fully dead teammates. However, it will not revive you if you go down within the staff's vortex yourself. Oh, and by the way, yes, this full revive also works in stuff like Elite Temporal Archimedia, where you usually can't immediately respawn. This staff is an absolute endgame crutch. Finally, on top of all of that, the Swelling Deluge perk will increase the duration of the vortex to an insane 40 seconds. In some cases, when picking up focus orbs fast enough, I have been able to get 2 copies of Nidri active at the same time. Altogether, I think the Vazarin focus school, with the addition of the new modding system, arcanes, and this Nidri staff, solidifies itself as a top tier pick for both the focus school and the Tektolyst weapon. For me, I didn't really have to think twice, and I put Nidri in S tier. As I've mentioned in the beginning of the video, unlocking Tektolyst weapons for your focus school will unlock the mod screen for said Tektolyst weapon. Here you can equip new mods and arcanes which are obtained from playing the Perita Rebellion missions. Let's go over the arcanes first. We currently have 5 of these new arcanes. First we have Zid-an Ashir. It increases status chance for all weapons on your Warframe when you hit enemies with your Tauron Strike ability. At rank 5 of the arcane, you will get a 6% status chance increase per enemy hit, up to a 300% max. You will keep this buff for 30 seconds and the percentage will be additive to other sources of status chance increase. The Cogron Tektolyst weapon can be used to trigger this arcane consistently and keep up the buff for longer amounts of time due to the Seismic Impact perk. All of these new arcanes will, by the way, also give you a passive effect. And for Zid-an and Sheer, this is an 18% increase to your initial charge towards your Tauron Strike. Then we have Zid-an Harass. This will give you 48% ammo efficiency for 30 seconds after executing your Tauron Strike, and it passively gives you 18% amp ammo efficiency. Both of these ammo efficiency buffs are additive to any other types of ammo efficiency, which means that there are a handful of weapons, including for instance the AX-52 in its hipfire mode, where you will now be able to get a 100% ammo efficiency for a short duration. Sadly, as with all ammo efficiency, it will not apply to your Incarnon ammo. Then we have Zid-an Osbok. This arcane strips 30% of current enemy overguard when you void sling close to them. Upon stripping any enemy overguard, which does not have to be a full strip, you will also gain a 3 times additive increase to your crit damage multiplier on your amp for 15 seconds. This arcane is absolutely great when combined with Magus Cloud, for instance, on your operator, which will increase your void sling radius by 300%, making it incredibly easy to hit targets with overguard. This arcane is ultimately incredibly useful for void cascades, especially for enabling you to run other focus schools outside of Madurai at level cap. Next up is the arcane Zid-an Sek-Eel, which will give you 30 seconds of invisibility after casting your Tauron Strike. And on top of this, it will also passively increase the charge rate of your Tauron Strike by 9%. Then finally we have Zid-an Uskos, which is the last arcane that we got, and this one increases heat damage on your secondary weapons by up to 250%. You can build up this buff by killing enemies with your Tauron Strike or Operator Amp, and the buff lasts for the entire duration of the mission. Each kill you make will charge this by 2.4% up to the 250% that I mentioned earlier. Falling off the map will let you keep the buff, however it will be reset on respawn. And after a recent hotfix that we got this update, the arcane will also work on warframes like Titania and Mesa for their Dex, Pixia and Regulators that will count as secondary weapons. Now having all of the new Tektolyst Arcanes discussed, let's go and look at the new Tauron mods. There's an absolute ton of them, but I will highlight quickly some of my favorites that I've been actively using so far. First we have the mod Hawk Call, which can be used to gain a 3 times final damage multiplier after entering void mode for the first shot that you fire from your amp. If you make sure this first shot is something like a glaive projectile from the pod scaffold, you can deal massive damage to multiple targets. Avi will increase amp critical chance by 60%. And on top of this, you can also increase your amp critical damage by 10% for each Zenurik mod that you have slotted in the Tektolyst mod menu. Hayan Dabor is the first source of amp multishot which we got in the game, which it provides 60% of. Ubri Kanep will give 60% bonus damage to amps, and it will give an additional 10% for each Tauron mod of a unique focus school that you have slotted in your build. And Pazu Shol will give 12% initial charge to your Tauron Strikes, and an additional 2% per Tauron mod of a unique school that you equip. Estivel Ika increases your void sling distance by 30% and gives a 10% increase to your void sling radius per Tauron mod of a unique school. Setap gives void sling efficiency, making it cheaper to use and spam. Vikla Safor gives 30% increased fire rate on amps as well as 30% amp ammo efficiency, which can be combined with Eternal Logistics for a total 102% amp efficiency, meaning that you can now fully spam your amp to your heart's content. And finally there's Zid-an, which is basically primed sure-footed but for your operators, and it will be accompanied by a 7.5 second cooldown. Besides these there are quite a few more, but these are the main ones that I wanted to highlight. Okay, so you might now be asking, well, this all sounds great, but what will actually change from here onwards, Casey? Well, mainly because of the fact that we can now mod the Tektolyst weapons, we got a bunch of damage sources that were previously missing to make focus schools outside of Madurai usable in endgame content like Void Cascade. With these new changes, all of the other focus schools became able to do the exact same content and not struggle as much, giving us way more playstyles and options to use, and thus overall build variety is massively increased. Every focus school can now boast an amp that's worthy of killing the highest level of enemies the game can throw at us, while also providing variety in how you approach missions or make specific types of builds. And I mean, what the heck, even role-playing got way better. Want to be the ultimate support to your team as a Citrine or Trinity? Well, you can finally pick Vazarin and still contribute with your operator where it matters. Want to become an unstoppable Rhino tank with a big hammer and big armor buffs to increase your overguard for Iron Skin? Unairu is now an even better pick than it was before. Every Tauron Strike, in my opinion, feels unique, brings entirely new gameplay elements and build synergies to light, and they all feel impactful in their own way. But yeah, that's just my opinion on the new additions to the focus system. If you enjoyed this video, let me know what you think about these new changes down in the comments below. Make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe if you learned anything. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye. Then, to close off the video, I want to say sorry for calling the Tektolyst weapons not Tektolyst weapons. I only found out that they were actually called Tektolyst weapons after finishing the entire video, so sorry for that. But I also want to thank all of the long-term members of the channel, who are Tommel, Nike418, Mega Ninja, Dwang Nguyen Tai, Pinter Aaron, Vixen Sage, Nocent Linux Gaming, Benjamin Cooper, Jalen Saunders, Sublemon, Patrick Onuowa Jr., Siester MR, Unknown User, File Avon, Yavuz Argun, Sane, Shaky Leguer, Don Kuji, and Fall Christian. To all of the newer members who also joined, thank you so much for becoming a member. Make sure you all also check out the Discord, which I will from now on link in every video description. Hope to see you there.